Hi, welcome to our Seeff the Uppers podcast. I'm Stephen Buerger and I operate in the Newlands area.
And I am Cindy McCulloch, and I specialise in Claremont Upper and Bishopscourt Village. We're very excited to welcome you guys here today. We've got a few important topics to discuss, which we're finding are very relevant to the market at the moment. And that being the scarcity in the market at the moment, how to achieve a record price, preparing your home for that record price, and renovating to sell. So, Stephen, do you want to lead us into the conversation by maybe just telling us a little bit about how the market is at the moment?
Sure. So the current market that we find ourselves in is one that is very much a high demand, low supply. So what that means is the number of buyer far outweighs the available stock in the market, which is leaving quite a few buyers, unfortunately in a sticky position where they're unable to find that dream home, and when they do find it, it's too little too late, unfortunately.
Quite frustrating, I'm sure.
Incredibly frustrating. Absolutely. So ultimately what we're seeing is that, as I say, stock levels are down in some areas up to 50% year on year.
Wow.
But the buyer interest and the buyer demand has just skyrocketed. So there's no shortage of supply, and the general kind of where the buyers are coming from are locally, so upcountry, as well as the international market too. So, as I say, so buyers are incredibly frustrated with the current market, as one can understand, because of the low supply. And ultimately, Cindy, what would be the solution to a buyer who's looking for their dream home, whether it be for a family home, a fixer-upper, kind of a duplex in a complex, whatever that may be? What is the solution?
Yeah, so at Seeff the Uppers, we have a client care consultant who specifically manages our buyers database, which we found is absolutely valuable in this market currently. So she manages all our buyers, is in contact with them regularly, updating the database to make sure that we have the most up-to-date database possible. And then if we have a new listing, before it even goes to market, she's able to send it out to our database, engage with the buyers. Before we've even listed a property, we send out a sneak peek, which gives you a kind of little sneak look into what we're about to list into the market. And by doing this, we often have properties that are selling before they even go to market, which is quite a new thing at the moment, which we're finding is happening a lot in this market.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the kind of terminology, a secret seller, is something that is quite new and fresh given the current market. And it allows one to list and ultimately market their home without going, and splashing your property over the portals, property portals, and kind of to every buyer out there. So it allows the agent through that refined database to bring those buyers who are really looking for, the right bedrooms, bathrooms, price point, the pockets within that particular suburb. And it really ensures that they're getting exposure. The seller is getting that exposure to the buyer market and buyer pool without, as I say, going to the open market. And, our team has been incredibly successful and proactive within that off-market space, that exclusive space. And we've achieved some incredibly, high pricing, record prices throughout the uppers. And it just shows where the market is, as I say. So really, we've got a lot of demand, and the buyers who are coming to have a look at those homes that are off market have already been in contact. They have been pre-approved, and if a buyer is still looking and hasn't yet been pre-approved, I would highly suggest that they do speak to their bond originator, absolutely, and get their ducks in a row ultimately. So when they do find that right property and the right home, they're able to really kind of jump on it.
Actually reminds me of a scenario we had recently where before even taking a buyer to view a property, they had asked me for the offer to purchase. And they had completed it, as much as they could. And then once they actually viewed the property, they were sitting armed with the paperwork already, and they could be in front of any other buyer who was interested in the property. And that's how, eagerly they were wanting to get their feet through the door to secure the property. They knew the address. They knew that it was going to be a viable option for them. And it's just really competitive at the moment.
Absolutely. And I think, another piece of advice for buyers is that if you are able to, and as much as you can, do your due diligence on that property, maybe before viewing, so that, as you say, when you do view and you like the property, you can then action straight away and you don't wait, because all too often we're seeing a day, an hour, 5 hours is ultimately too late in this current
You're just
market.
competing with too many buyers out there.
You are. So as I say, we've managed to achieve some fantastic record prices.
Yes.
Now, if I was a seller in the uppers, how would I position my home? What do I need to do to try and achieve that record price?
Well, I think ultimately properties that present well are always going to achieve a higher price. And I don't mean that you have to go and completely renovate the property, but I find if a property is presenting well in terms of a fresh coat of paint, looking at maintenance things like peeling, is there peeling paint that is visible? Are there any areas of damp? Have you had a leak recently? So taking care of those things so that when a buyer walks into a property, they're ultimately viewing a very finished product, neat, tidy, declutter spaces, try and depersonalize the space as much as possible. So get rid of any things that are lying around. As I said, declutter. Garden space, people are always going to look at a garden. Is it presentable? Your first impression of a property, I think, is huge.
I think it's probably the most valuable impression, because that first impression often is the lasting impression.
Yeah, and that could be curb appeal, your wall, is it nicely painted? Your garden, your shrubbery outside, is it that first impression when someone walks through that front door? Are they getting a feeling? And also creating that feeling when you have viewings, simple things like, now it's wintertime, lighting the fire in the fireplace, switching on the lights if it's, a bit of a miserable day outside, creating a sense of warmth in the home. And us as agents, we obviously try and guide our sellers in these small little things that help present a home in a beautiful light.
Absolutely. And I think as a seller, I think it's always not possible. But if you are able to, I think it's vital that one does maybe just remove themselves during that viewing. So it allows a buyer to view comfortably and also confidentially, because if they they feel that a buyer, the owner, is still in the premises on the property, they may be listening, and therefore the feedback might be not as genuine as it may be. So I think that is also just a key takeaway for anyone who is looking to place their property on their market, whether it be on the open market or through that discreet channel of the secret seller. I think, it just allows the buyer to really envisage themselves in their property without having the owner.
And I think it's difficult sometimes, sellers, they want to be accommodating and they're not always able to, leave the property. But it does make a huge difference in terms of the viewing and the comfortability of our buyers being able to just view freely. What we also often do is do open hours, which makes it easier for a seller, where we can get a few buyers through, not like your old, show days as such, but an open hour where we can get the buyers in. There, at that point, the seller can then go out for an hour, leave us, to have access to the property and allow the buyers to kind of view freely.
Absolutely. And I think from a seller's point of view, at least they know and they're comfortable in the fact that the agent knows who is actually coming to view their home. Whereas those traditional show days, even the agent didn't know who exactly was coming to view the property. So at least, during those open hours, we've got the names, we know.
We can prep the house.
We can prep the house. Absolutely. And then it allows ultimately the buyer to have that time, have that space. And the seller then isn't, pestered every half an hour, of the day with the viewing. So we try and bring, and it also creates that demand for the property. So, talking about record prices, we're often using that strategy. We're able to achieve record prices above asking prices. So that's a massive takeaway for a homeowner in the area who is considering putting their property on the market.
So if we've got a beautifully presented home, and people have gone through the effort of looking at maintenance things, decluttering, are there any do's and don'ts in terms of renovating to sell? So any important things to think of when you now actually looking to renovate to sell the property?
I think absolutely. And I think it starts with something that's quite simple and often overlooked, a coat of paint. So a neutral color, it goes a long way. And often a coat of paint is probably a homeowner's best ROI, return on your investment.
Yeah.
It allows the buyer to walk in with a fresh coat. It's especially a neutral color. It allows somebody to really envisage where they can put their belongings, furniture, etc. It just gives a rather warm feeling. Energy efficiency is a major at the moment. So a lot of buyers within the upper market, they don't, energy in terms of solar, battery, inverter it used to be a nice to have. It's now almost an
Necessity.
absolutely a necessity. So those are the two. The third one, kitchen and bathroom. So those are the real money makers.
Always talking points.
Absolutely, as talking points, but you don't necessarily want to go in and gut your kitchen completely. What you can do is there's smaller, softer approaches. So changing door handles, changing the coat of paint on the cupboards.
Respraying the cupboards.
Absolutely.
Painting them.
Yeah, changing the taps. So they're relatively low on the cost, but they're high on the impact. And in terms of curb appeal, we've mentioned that previously.
Yes.
Curb appeal is often those first 10 seconds when you arrive at a home, you really get to sense what the home's about. So those first 10 seconds are vital. And whether that being pruning, mowing the lawn, replanting a few plants, it all goes a long way.
Long way.
And the last one that I would say is a do is the sensory fixes. So if there is a leak, have the leak fixed. If there's a larger issue behind the leak, don't just paint over it. So, for instance, a damp issue, if there's a leak from the gutter, etc., I think let's rather have those fixed and repaired properly,
yes,
because it will help you ultimately achieve a higher selling price. So maybe I can ask you the question, the don'ts to renovating.
So I think any major renovation is a don't. So something like adding a additional bedroom, changing a garage, parking comes at such a premium that I think changing or converting your garage into an additional bedroom or work from home space is, pretty much a don't. I think people appreciate having parking, having off-street parking,
Absolutely.
having a garage for storage, potentially a swimming pool. It's a nice to have, but adding a swimming pool comes at an expense. And it's not always for everyone.
Absolutely, it all depends on the type of buyer.
Yes.
Absolutely. So if you're a younger family, you may not want a swimming pool at that right time.
Correct.
If you've got older kids, absolutely. If the kids love swimming,
Yeah.
but you just never know.
Or an older couple that potentially has spent their whole life owning a pool with a big family, and now they're looking for a more lock up and go, low maintenance lifestyle.
Yeah.
So that, and also, I think over personalized finishes is something that I do need to mention. So if you are renovating, excuse me, and using something that's very personalized, like a very trendy countertop or backsplash, or doing your bathroom with a very trendy tile, it might date quite quickly. So go with something a little bit more neutral, even when you're choosing paint colors, as you mentioned earlier on, something neutral, something that's fresh, that appeals to a bigger market and not closing you off to a potential buyer pool.
Yeah, because I think, we see it all too often that when a buyer purchases the property, transfer takes place, they move in.
Yeah.
More often than not, they do something to add their own touch or flair to that property, whether it be a color scheme,
Yes.
whether it be an internal renovation, an external, installing a pool or renovating, the outside kind of cottage, etc. So, they want to make it feel personalized. And often that's where, they add their own personalization or their own style, but then they are looking to keep the property and hold the property for some time.
Yeah.
So these aren't changes that they're making right just before they're selling, large expenses just before they're selling, where they're not necessarily going to achieve that ROI right away.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
So now we've got this beautifully presented home, Stephen, and we've done maybe a few updates. What is the last thing that we need to be mindful of when we take a property to market? Is surely marketing it correctly?
Absolutely, it is. Absolutely. And the correct marketing goes a long way in positioning the property and putting the property's best foot forward to the market. So in terms of the marketing, there are multiple facets behind the scenes. So you've got photography, whether it be dusk shoots, videography, internal floor plans, drones that we fly. That gives a great bird's eye perception of where the property is located, the dimensions of where the property sits, as well as the views that one could achieve. For instance, if there was a single story, if you were looking to build that second story, what kind of views would one expect? And then last but not least is the floor plan, ultimately, which just helps with the buyer. And before they even view the property, we would have already sent that through to them so they know exactly the layout of the home, the dimensions. So it helps that buyer, when they do walk the property, they can already picture where furniture is going. And
I've always found that so helpful to have the actual layout of the property before you've even seen it. I've had clients who have actually requested that before viewing so that they know the proportions of the home, what the layout is like, and whether it's suitable for them or not. Which then I suppose also helps with eliminating a lot of buyers through the door that might not be suitable, or the property might not be suitable for them.
Absolutely. And we see it time after time, for a younger family, for instance, if there's a main bedroom on the one wing and then you've got the rest of the bedrooms elsewhere, it may not suit every young family. But again, you just never know. So having that floor plan already puts, the right buyers into the pool, and we can then obviously bring them around to have a look at the property.
So Stephen, we've covered a lot today, and thank you for sharing your wisdom with us and your experiences. But one thing that we have realized is that the uppers areas in the southern suburbs is unmatched.
It is.
And in order to navigate these areas, you need an area specialist like ourselves. Stephen looks after the Newlands area and myself in Claremont Upper and Bishopscourt Village. But check us out online and our socials. Until next time.